The Fading Pear Blossom. Chapter 1. I floated in the air, watching Paige push the door open. His armor was stained with blood and dust. In the 2 months he had been away, he had lost some weight but looked even more heroic. My sister, Song-Ru-Chu, nervously clutched her dress, then steeled herself and stood up from the bed, walking over to Paige and softly saying, "My lord, let me help you undress and bathe." Her voice was almost identical to mine, but our voices were originally different. 7 days ago, when I was about to die, she said to me, "Ali, I went through a lot to change my voice to sound just like yours. What do you think?" And indeed, it was similar enough that even someone as cautious as Paige couldn't tell that his wife had been replaced. Paige removed his armor and spread his arms, and Song-Ru-Chu blushed as her delicate, fair hands reached for his belt. She wasn't originally this fair, but for the past 2 years, she took a whitening medicine daily and stayed out of the sun to match my skin tone. Not only her voice and skin, but she also copied my mannerisms perfectly. She said she spent 2 whole years preparing. She said she was determined to succeed. Paige looked down at her and asked, "Did you change the incense?" Song-Ru-Chu hesitated, then softly replied, "Yes." "How do you like the scent, my lord?" Paige frowned. "It's too strong, not as good as the one you used before." "Change it back," Song-Ru-Chu quickly responded. "Yes, my lord." Paige turned and walked towards the bath, with Song-Ru-Chu following, her eyes filled with joy. She was happy to have gone unnoticed. I didn't want to go to the bath area, knowing what would happen next. Paige had joined the army at 12, and after 13 years, his vigor was fierce, and his actions in the bedroom were extraordinary. Whether he had been with another woman in the past 2 months, I didn't know, but whenever he returned home after a long absence, it was always unbearable for me. He never showed me any tenderness, saying, "Your parents sent you here to please me, yet you don't seem very dedicated." Later, the nanny advised me to be more accommodating to him, and only then did he become less violent. But originally, it was Song-Ru-Chu who was supposed to marry Paige. When Paige returned to Xiandu from the northern frontier that year, he had 5 severed heads hanging from his saddle. Though he told the emperor he had encountered bandits and killed them on the way, it was clear to everyone that these 5 heads represented the 5 families who had impeached the Pei family. Our Song family was one of them. The Pei family had suffered tremendously due to the impeachment, and Paige was naturally seeking revenge. So, the 5 families offered precious treasures and their most beautiful women, hoping to appease his anger. Song-Ru-Chu was that beauty. She feared being tortured to death by Paige and begged our parents not to send her. They loved her and eventually decided to send me in her place. Though Song-Ru-Chu and I were twins, a fortune teller had predicted that one of us would bring ruin to the Song family. From birth, I was the quiet one, marked as the jinx. They intended to drown me. My mother couldn't bear it and threatened her life to save mine. I was then confined to a small courtyard, only nursed by a nanny. From then on, the world only knew the cherished eldest daughter of the Song family, Song-Ru-Chu, and not the other daughter, Song-Ali, who grew like a weed in that small corner of the Song estate. The Song family never named me. It was the nanny who called me Ali. She said that on the day I was brought to the small courtyard, the pear blossoms were in full bloom, the most beautiful she had ever seen, so she named me Ali. Ali, the transient. Chapter 2. My soul drifted uncontrollably to the edge of the bath. Paige was already in the pool, leaning against the edge amidst the rising steam. His body bore the scars of old wounds, and Song-Ru-Chu's eyes flickered with fear when she saw them. She was scared. I found it ironic she hadn't hesitated when she killed me. I floated beside Paige, waving my hand in front of his face. Though I had always been somewhat afraid of him, now I hoped he could sense me or realize that Song-Ru-Chu wasn't me. My body was still buried in the Song family's garden, being devoured by insects. If he could avenge me for the sake of our 3 years together, I would be grateful. If not, he could at least dig up my body and burn it. I liked warm places and didn't want to lie in darkness forever. Unfortunately, he couldn't sense me. He closed his eyes to rest. Song Ruchu steadied herself, biting her lip gently as she prepared to enter the pool. Peiji suddenly opened his eyes and looked at her. "Why is my lord looking at me like that?" Song Ruchu asked. Peiji replied, "I heard that while I was away, you returned to the Song family." Song Ruchu immediately knelt. "Yes, my lord. My mother was ill, so I went back for a few days. Please forgive me." Mentioning my mother still pained me. She had once threatened the Song family with her life to save mine, yet when Song Ruchu wanted to be with Peiji, she tricked me into returning, allowing Song Ruchu to poison me. I wanted to ask her why. Why did she love me yet kill me? Peiji listened to Song Ruchu's explanation and said, "If your mother was ill, it's understandable that you went back." I was stunned. Peiji had never spoken to me like that before. On our wedding night, he said I was a gift from my parents, and thus I belonged to him entirely, with no self of my own. Alive, I was his; dead, I was his. I was to endure his torment and bear his anger. That night, he pinched my face and coldly said, "Even if you are indeed pitiful, don't expect any pity from me." He meant it and acted accordingly. In our 3 years of marriage, aside from our nights together, he rarely spoke to me, let alone allowed me to return home. "Thank you for your kindness, my lord," Song Ruchu said softly, standing up and taking a towel to wipe Peiji's body. Suddenly, a voice came from outside. "My lord, the emperor urgently summons you." "I understand," Peiji said, rising to leave. Song Ruchu stomped her foot in frustration, cursing the emperor's untimely summons. Chapter 3. Song Ruchu returned to the room, twirling happily. My former maid, Yer, entered with tea. "Congratulations, my lady, for successfully deceiving the lord." Yer had been sent by the Song family 2 years ago after the nanny who raised me passed away. At the time, I thought it was out of love, but now I realize it was to prepare for Song Ruchu to replace me. They had planned to kill me 2 years ago. Song Ruchu pulled Yer close. "Smell me, what scent do you detect?" Yer sniffed carefully. "Miss, you only have the scent of pear blossoms." Song Ruchu was still uneasy. "Really?" But the lord noticed the change in my scent immediately. I didn't understand either. Peiji wasn't usually knowledgeable about fragrances, so how did he notice the difference on Song Ruchu? Yer suggested, "Perhaps the previous incense was very strong, and the scent hasn't fully dissipated. A few more days of pear blossom incense should cover it completely." "That makes sense." Song Ruchu lit several more sticks of pear blossom incense, then took out a small doll and began to stab it with a needle. "Eternal damnation, no reincarnation." The doll bore my name, Song Ali. I thought the sorcerer who taught her this must be a fraud, as I felt nothing despite her repeated stabbings. After a while, she spoke to the doll. "Sister, don't think you're unlucky. You had 3 years with the Lord. When I saw him earlier, he looked like a god. He's far better than the scholar our parents found for me. No, he's better than any man in the world." After I married Peiji, she could no longer live as Song Ruchu. Our parents sent her to a secluded place and found her a scholar as a husband. I don't know what happened to that scholar, but I suspect he was killed like me. She twisted the doll's head. "You should thank me. Without me, you wouldn't have married the Lord and enjoyed his wealth and status. Now, everything is just returning to its rightful owner." She had once feared Peiji and made me marry him in her place, but after seeing me survive a year with him and watching him rise in the court, she fell in love with him again. She couldn't eat or sleep, driven mad by her obsession. "Yer, how often did the Lord share a bed with Ali?" Song Ruchu asked. Yer replied, "Whenever the Lord was not on official duty, he almost always stayed with the second miss." Song Ruchu glared at Yer. "So what? 3 years of favor, and she didn't bear a single child. It shows the Lord only used her to relieve his boredom. She was right. Paige had told me never to hope for his children, so I took medicine to prevent pregnancy. I didn't want to bring a child into the world to suffer the same fate as mine. Chapter 4. As night deepened, Paige still hadn't returned. Song Ruchu, too sleepy to wait, instructed Yer to wake her when he arrived. I floated out of the room and sat on the rooftop, looking towards the Emperor's palace. Rumors had circulated that the Emperor was gravely ill, and Paige was likely summoned to take on urgent responsibilities. If that happened, he would wield immense power, second only to the Emperor. I wondered if he would then act against the Song family. In recent years, he had been biding his time, preparing for revenge. The Song family and the other 4 clans thought that offering him treasures and beautiful women would assuage his resentment, but they couldn't compare to the hatred in his heart. That day, I returned to the Song family intending to warn them of Paige's intentions, but before I could speak, they poisoned me. The moon set, and the eastern sky lightened. The sun was about to rise, and I had to retreat back into the room. I am a ghost. I fear sunlight. The sunlight I once loved so much. Chapter 5. Paige returned at noon, and Song Ruchu had prepared a table full of delicious dishes for him. I slumped in the corner, feeling hungry too. In the weeks before my death, I had little appetite and felt nauseous after eating. When I arrived at the Song family, I hadn't even eaten before drinking the poisoned wine Song Ruchu handed me, so I suppose I died of hunger too. Song Ruchu, anxious in the past few days waiting for Paige, hadn't eaten much either. Now with Paige by her side, her appetite returned. Paige, however, did not touch his food. Instead, he just looked at her, his gaze scrutinizing, his fingers lightly pinching, a habitual motion when he was deep in thought. Had he discovered something? "Why isn't my lord eating?" Song Ruchu asked. Paige didn't answer. "You seem to have a good appetite." Song Ruchu immediately realized her mistake. She should have been imitating my quiet and docile demeanor. She put down her chopsticks and lowered her head. "Forgive me, my lord." Paige then said, "I heard you weren't feeling well last month. The imperial physician will visit at the hour of the sheep to examine you." Song Ruchu's eyes flashed with panic. She worried that the physician would discover something. After all, while appearances could be altered, the body's details could not. I was puzzled too. Last month, I was still alive, and it was clearly me he referred to as unwell. In the past 3 years, I had occasionally fallen ill, but the Pei family's doctors always treated me. Now he had invited the imperial physician. Why was he so concerned about my health? Though unwilling, Song Ruchu dared not defy Paige, so she kept asking Yer about my symptoms from last month. Yer recalled, "Last month, the second miss wasn't unwell, just had trouble eating. She felt nauseous when eating meat but otherwise, nothing significant." Song Ruchu's expression turned serious. "What you're describing sounds like she was pregnant." I was shocked too, but how could that be? I hadn't stopped taking my medicine. Yer reassured her, "Don't worry, even if the second miss was pregnant, she's dead. It's impossible to prove." That's right, I was dead. Even if I was pregnant, the fetus was only 2 months old. Even if my body was exhumed, who would tell? Chapter 6. The imperial physician arrived at the residence promptly, examining Song Ruchu before speaking with Paige in private. I floated over and heard the physician say, "My lord, a lady is not pregnant." So Paige really suspected I was pregnant. That's why he was concerned. If I had been carrying his child, he could have dealt with it sooner. "Thank you," Paige replied indifferently. "My lord need not worry. The lady's pulse is calm and steady. She is in good health. If my lord desires an heir, there will surely be news this year." The physician assumed that Paige wanted children. Paige's gaze shifted. "So, she is healthy?" "Yes, healthy, the physician confirmed. Peiji looked towards Song Ruchu and then instructed a servant, "Go to the Song residence and inform them that I will accompany the lady back to her family home tomorrow." In our 3 years together, Peiji had never voluntarily visited the Song residence. He rarely even met with my parents when they came to the Pei household, but he hadn't discovered anything. If he had, given his ruthless nature, he would have already wiped out the Song family. Song Ruchu, learning that he planned to visit the Song residence, became uneasy. Is it possible he suspects I'm not Song Ali? But soon she regained her composure. No, he would have taken my head by now if he knew. It must be something the physician said that aroused his suspicion. Year, go and find out immediately. She was clever. A prominent family like the Songs would naturally produce such astute descendants. Chapter 7. Early the next morning, the carriage set off for the Song residence. The spring sun was scorching, so I had to hide in Peiji's shadow as I floated towards the carriage. He was tall, and in his shadow, I was protected from the sun's rays. I never imagined that one day I would need his protection. When we arrived at the Song residence, my parents were already waiting at the gate. They eagerly greeted Peiji. My mother held Song Ruchu's hand, her eyes filled with concern. I felt a pang of sadness. In my memory, my mother had never looked at me like that. Even on the day I married Peiji, knowing I might die, she had been happy. Happy that Song Ruchu could live. At that time, I couldn't understand. I thought my mother loved me because she had once risked her life to save mine. Mother, I would very willingly switched places with my sister. Why did you have to kill me? I asked as I floated beside her. But she couldn't hear me. She had ignored my pleas when I was alive. Why would she remember me now that I am dead? Her heart and mind were entirely focused on Song Ruchu. My father subtly asked Peiji why he had come with Song Ruchu. Considering the current political situation, Peiji should have been in the palace. Peiji said it was a beautiful spring day, and the Song family's garden was the best in Chengdu, so he came to enjoy the scenery. I knew that wasn't his real reason, but I paid attention anyway. My body was buried in the garden. My parents hadn't moved it yet. As a large family, the Songs had many people around, and any misstep would be noticed. Peiji took his time strolling through the garden, with Song Ruchu nervously following him. My mother patted her hand gently, signaling her not to worry. My father asked Peiji about recent court affairs, but Peiji didn't answer, instead picking a crabapple flower and placing it in Song Ruchu's hair. Song Ruchu's eyes lit up, then she shyly lowered her head. My parents smiled, relieved. Peiji used to put flowers in my hair too. It wasn't out of love. I was just a possession he could decorate for his amusement, or maybe he liked to dress me up to his liking before using me, making it more enjoyable for him. Thank you, my lord, Song Ruchu said softly. Peiji smiled and continued walking. Up ahead was the place where I was buried, under those ethereal flowers. But when I floated over, I couldn't sense my body anymore. I saw the soil had been recently turned. The body had been moved, likely last night. They didn't dare take the risk. Peiji, having survived countless battles, could have sensed something. Where could I be now? Suddenly, a breeze blew countless pear blossoms towards us, filling the air with their cold fragrance. Pear blossoms bloom before the snow, signaling the end of spring. Peiji followed the direction of the falling flowers, spotting a small courtyard at the edge of the garden, where a pear tree was in full bloom. He walked towards it, but my parents intercepted him, saying there was nothing to see there. Peiji remarked he had never seen such pure white pear blossoms and insisted on taking a look. Song Ruchu quickly pretended to feel dizzy. My lord, it's too hot. I feel unwell and need to rest. Seeing her pale face and sweaty forehead, Peiji hesitated but ultimately left with her. Inspecting my parents' expressions, I knew my body must be in that courtyard. Chapter 8. In the room, my mother stayed with Song Ruchu while she rested. and my father took Paige to a quiet study for tea. Mother, was the Jinx really pregnant? Song Ruchu asked. My mother nodded. Last night, we cut open her stomach, and indeed, she was. Hearing this, my stomach ached as if my soul had been cut open too. I never thought I was actually pregnant. After taking so much medicine, I believed I could no longer have children. Fortunately, we acted first. If she had started showing, I wouldn't be able to pretend to be her, Song Ruchu said with relief. My mother nodded. Today, the Lord was very kind to you. You must seize the opportunity. Once you have his child, even if he suspects something, he'll let it go for the child's sake. Year added, I also had someone ask the physician with a large sum of money. The physician said the Lord only inquired about your health and nothing else. Song Ruchu was displeased, so he wasn't worried about me, but the Jinx. My mother comforted her. Ruchu, Ali is dead. The Lord is yours now. Today, he even put a flower in your hair. You will grow old together and have many children. Song Ruchu finally smiled. Mother, I feel so happy right now. My mother looked at her with affection. As long as my dear daughter is happy, I couldn't watch any further. I floated out of the room. But where could I go? In life, I had no family to return to and couldn't fit into my husband's home. In death, there was no escape. Chapter 9. That night, Song Ruchu waited for Paige just like the previous night. But Paige was still at Fang Pavilion, drinking. In the past, I would have breathed a sigh of relief, hoping he'd drink himself to sleep so I could get some rest. Now, it felt odd. He had placed a flower in Song Ruchu's hair earlier in the day, so why hadn't he come at night? I floated to Fang Pavilion, where he sat holding a cup but not drinking, with his retainer Zhou Fang beside him. Zhou Fang mentioned that Paige's visit to the Song residence and the display of harmony would lead the court to believe that the Pei and Song families were united. This would isolate the Song family from Paige's enemies, reducing any threat they might pose. So that was Paige's reason for visiting the Song residence. I had thought he had noticed something off about Song Ruchu. I had overthought it. Zhou Fang continued discussing court matters, but Paige seemed distracted. Zhou Fang noticed and asked, "Does my lord have something on his mind?" Paige replied, "A few days ago, I dreamt of a lady and a small child standing on the opposite bank of a river, surrounded by blooming pear blossoms. I called out to her, but she ignored me." Zhou Fang laughed. "It must be that your thoughts during the day influenced your dreams. Perhaps my lord truly desires a family." Paige shook his head. "When my parents and family died, I dreamt of them standing on the opposite bank of a river as well. No matter how I called, they couldn't hear me." Zhou Fang quickly reassured him, "Don't be sad, my lord. The lady is safe in the residence now. It was just a dream." Paige took a sip of wine. Perhaps it was just a dream. After a moment of silence, he added, "Keep an eye on the Song family. It's unusual for her to recover so quickly after returning there. It seems they are hiding something." After Zhou Fang left, I sat across from Paige, quietly watching him. If I weren't a spirit, I would never dare to look at him so intently. He had mentioned dreaming of me and a small child under the pear trees. Could he have sensed our death? Did he care about me too? The night breeze blew gently, insects chirped merrily, and the moon cast long shadows. Paige drank his wine, and I had no reflection. After a long while, he finally rose and walked towards Song Ruchu's quarters. She had already fallen asleep, leaning against the bed with a smile on her face. She wasn't good at waiting. Waiting, especially for someone with the power of life and death, meant not daring to fall asleep. Year moved to wake her, but Paige waved his hand, let her sleep. Song Ruchu was truly fortunate. Even disguised as me, she immediately gained what I never had. Chapter 10. I wanted to send a dream to Paige, to tell him that I was buried beneath a pear tree in the Song family's garden, but I didn't know how to enter his dreams. He was asleep, his brows furrowed as if in a nightmare. Over the past 3 years, I had seen him like this many times, sometimes even shedding tears in his sleep. Whenever I tried to wake him, he would immediately wake up and grab my neck. Only upon seeing it was me, he would loosen his grip. He once told me not to touch him while he slept because he might kill me. I was scared for a long time until I heard that during his years in the northern frontier, he frequently faced assassination attempts, causing him to sleep uneasily. I thought for a moment, then cupped his face in my hands, resting my forehead against his, hoping it might let me into his dreams. But it was still no use. Despite his vigilance, he didn't even twitch an eyelid. These past few days, I had tried to reach out to others and other spirits, but I seemed to be bound to Song Ruchu. Whenever I moved too far from her, an invisible force would pull me back. I didn't know what else she had done to me. Was I to be bound like this forever? As I lifted my head to leave, Peji suddenly turned and held me in his arms. Even though I had no physical form, it seemed he could hold me. Then he woke up. He looked at his empty arms, then his throat moved as he blinked, his breathing gradually steadying. I heard him say, "Peji, don't let her deceive you." In our marriage, he remained ever vigilant, even though countless nights he seemed to want to etch me into his soul. With the dawn's first light, he reverted to being the North Town King, Peji, and I remained just Song Ruchu from the Song family. Chapter 11. Before dawn, another message came from the palace saying that the emperor had suddenly awakened. Peji entered the palace, and not long after, the funeral bell tolled. The emperor had passed away, and the entire nation was in mourning. The new emperor was young, and Peji became regent. 13 years ago, he was exiled to the northern frontier in shackles, but after 13 years of battles, he now stood at the pinnacle of power, and then, he began his ruthless purge. The 5 families involved in his family's downfall were nearly eradicated, with only the Song family remaining. People whispered and joked, the Zhu, Wang, Luo, and Zi families should have offered beauties instead of treasures back then. Exactly, jewels are common, while people are sentimental. That lady was truly a beauty, delicate like a jade flower. No matter how cold-hearted the Northern Town King is, how could he resist such a charm? I heard that whenever the Northern Town King is at home, he hardly leaves the lady's bed. As I heard these words, my mother was praising Song Ruchu. "My dear daughter, you are now the most esteemed woman in the land, even more so than the Empress Dowager." Song Ruchu seemed uninterested. "What's the use of being esteemed? I haven't seen the Lord for over a month." My mother advised her to be patient, saying that he was busy with state affairs and things would improve once he was done. Song Ruchu worried that other women might replace her during this time. My mother laughed. "There aren't any currently, and even if there are, your father and I will deal with them." "Mother, you're so good to me." My mother smiled. "Who else should I be good to? You're my precious treasure." I watched them, feeling disheartened. Was it because I didn't grow up by my mother's side that I was considered disposable? Song Ruchu asked about the state of my body, and my mother replied that they hadn't checked, but it was likely decomposed, nourishing the pear tree. I looked down at my feet, feeling she was right. A few days ago, my feet started becoming transparent. I thought this might be the beginning of my dissolution. I didn't know why I was still lingering or how much longer I could stay, nor did I understand why, after all this time, no ghostly messengers had come to claim me. Chapter 12. 2 days passed, and Peji was finally coming back. Song Ruchu meticulously dressed herself in front of the mirror. As she admired her reflection, she asked, "Did the Lord always come here on his own? Ali never invited him?" "Yes," replied. Song Ruchu scoffed. She truly had her ways. I underestimated her before. Suggested, "My lady, would you like to wear something more subdued?" The second miss rarely wore such bright colors. Song Ruchu's face grew cold. She was herself, and I am me. I wear what I like. But, Year hesitated. Year, Song Ruchu turned to face her. It's been 2 months. Song Ali is turning to bones. What is there to worry about? A few days ago, I thought she was clever. Now, she seemed remarkably short-sighted. No, she is not short-sighted. She is just desperately trying to shed my shadow. Nobody wants to be someone else forever. Chapter 13. At dusk, Peiji finally arrived. He wore a black and gold robe, carrying an air of nobility amidst his battle-scared exterior. He had always been an aristocrat, but his past had been shrouded in blood and hatred. Song Ruchu quickly stood to greet him, her eyes filled with admiration and infatuation. "My lord, you're finally back," she said, softly leaning into Peiji's embrace. Peiji, too, was full of energy and presence at that moment. With his high status and a beauty in his arms, which man wouldn't he be pleased? He wrapped his arm around Song Ruchu's slender waist, and his stern gaze softened with a touch of tenderness. "Yes, I'm back," he said in a hoarse voice. He frowned slightly. "Have you not changed your incense yet?" Song Ruchu's eyes darted nervously. "I did. After you mentioned it, I stopped using it." Peiji looked at her thoughtfully but said nothing. They shared a meal and then he left. As soon as he was gone, Song Ruchu ripped off her perfumed sachets. "I've been using pear blossom incense for so long, it's almost soaked into my skin." How could he still say it smells different? "Year, are you lying to me? Do you want your family to be punished?" she yelled. Year immediately knelt. "I would never deceive you, my lady." "What's the reason then?" Year thought for a moment. "Maybe it's not the incense but your natural scent. I've heard that everyone has their own unique smell." Song Ruchu said. "What difference does it make? Don't tell me he's not just attracted to looks. I almost can't recognize myself now. I look so much like her." Song Ruchu didn't know, and neither did I. Peiji never mentioned fragrance before. I floated over to Peiji. He sat at his desk, staring at the inkstone in the flickering candlelight. He used to write here with me grinding ink beside him. Outside were bamboo trees, and the rustling leaves mixed with the scent of ink created a unique tranquility that I loved. The wind still blew, the bamboo leaves still rustled, but I was no longer there grinding ink. After a while, Zhou Fang came. Peiji asked, "Any news from the Song residence?" Zhou Fang replied, "Everything seems normal. Did you notice something unusual?" Peiji said coldly, "Her scent, it's still not hers." Zhou Fang scratched his head. "You mean the lady? Changing scent is no big deal. It's not like she's changed." Peiji glanced at the newly delivered pears on the table and summoned someone to request that Song Ruchu make pear pastries for him the next day. "I used to make pear pastries for him." Was he trying to distinguish by taste? He was indeed suspicious. I never thought he would truly care. Perhaps he couldn't tolerate being deceived. No matter, as long as my body is unearthed, that's enough. The pear tree in the courtyard had been with me for 17 years, growing with the sun, moon, and rain, bearing fruit sweeter than my bitter life. It was pure and good, just like the nanny who raised me. It was also a mother. It shouldn't have to nourish my decayed flesh and bones. Chapter 14. When Song Ruchu received the request, she became anxious. "Why does the Lord suddenly want pear pastries? I don't know how to make them." Yeer tried to calm her. "I have seen the second miss make them a few times. I know the method." Song Ruchu quickly had her write it down and then headed to the kitchen to prepare. She worked all night, wasting several batches of ingredients, but finally steamed a pot of pastries. Yeer tasted one. "It's close enough. It tastes right." Song Ruchu sighed in relief, freshened up, and then brought the pear pastries to Peiji. He tried one, slowly swallowing it. "What does my lord think of the taste?" Song Ruchu asked expectantly. I was also curious, but to be honest, I didn't even know how my own pear pastries tasted. The first time I made pear pastries for Peiji was about half a year after our marriage. He had been injured and returned home to recover. The nanny had asked me to care for him. I had hesitated, fearing that my presence would only upset him further. The nanny had laughed. Ali, a husband and wife's relationship is built step by step. He's a soldier at his core. He isn't so bad. You have no parents to protect you, and it's a harsh world for women, but you can use what you have now to create your own home. I heeded her advice and went to him. Paige didn't like me, but he didn't send me away either. I endured his coldness and cared for him for half a month, changing his bandages and helping him wash. It was during that time that I made the pear pastries. One day, when he was asleep, I saw the pears in the courtyard were ripe, and it seemed a waste not to use them. So, I picked them and made pastries. I remember that day, as the fragrance of pears filled the room, sweat beaded on my face. He suddenly appeared and asked what I was making. I lied. I saw my lord had no appetite and thought to make something refreshing. He had smirked. Did you poison it? I wouldn't dare. To prove it, I took a bite, burning my mouth and spitting it out. For a moment, I thought he might kill me, but he didn't. And later, he even ate several pieces of the pear pastries. The nanny had smiled. See, you're one step closer. After that, I made pear pastries every year. It became a habit. Chapter 15. After eating the pear pastry, Paige stared at Song Ruchu for a long time. Song Ruchu asked again, "My lord, how does it taste?" Paige placed his hand on her slender neck, a gesture that filled Song Ruchu with joy. I felt a pang of disappointment. It seemed my pear pastries were nothing special. But in the next moment, Paige's hand tightened around her neck, his eyes filled with murderous intent. "Who are you? Where is Song Ruchu?" Song Ruchu struggled to breathe, her face turning red as she tried to pry Paige's hand off, but her strength was no match for his. "My lord, I am Song Ruchu," she said with difficulty. Paige repeated, "I'll ask you again, where is Song Ruchu?" Hearing the commotion, Zhou Fang and others rushed in, urging Paige to calm down. "If my lord has doubts, he should question her thoroughly. If you kill her, you'll get no answers," Zhou Fang said loudly. Paige slowly released his grip. Song Ruchu collapsed to the ground, coughing violently, her eyes filled with fear, but she still didn't admit anything, insisting she was Song Ruchu. Technically, she wasn't lying. Paige looked down at her. "If you are her, then tell me, how did you recover so quickly after being so weak when you first married? And why does your scent and the taste of your pear pastries differ so much from before?" Song Ruchu then realized that when I married in her place, my health was poor. Living in that small courtyard with limited food, my health had never been good, but I didn't understand either. Besides the contraceptive medicine, when did I take any supplements? I must have taken them, otherwise, I wouldn't have had the child. Did Paige have someone change my medicine? Did he ever want to have a child with me? Song Ruchu shook her head, crying, "My lord, I don't know what you're talking about." Paige sneered, "You and she are indeed very similar, but you are not her." "Absolutely not." Zhou Fang summoned the Song couple. He wanted my parents to identify her, but he had the right answer, just the wrong method. Chapter 16. My parents arrived quickly and pretended to examine Song Ruchu, then firmly declared she was indeed Song Ruchu. They weren't lying, so Paige couldn't find any inconsistencies. He didn't know that the Song family had another daughter, a daughter who had been his wife for 3 years, named Song Ali. Zhou Fang and the others tried to calm him. "My lord, perhaps you're just too tired. You should rest." Paige slowly composed himself and walked out. I followed him as he walked under the moonlight. This man, I found him hard to understand. Fragrance, health, common pear pastries, they couldn't definitively prove a person had been replaced. With his personality, he shouldn't make such a hasty judgment, yet he was so certain. Zhou Fang caught up and asked, "My lord, what's wrong?" Paige stopped and looked at him. "Do you remember the dream I mentioned?" Zhou Fang thought for a moment. You mean the one where you saw the lady and a child standing on the opposite bank of a river, and no matter how you called, she didn't respond? Peiji nodded slowly. Zhou Fang, she might already be dead. My life has always slipped away from me, my parents, siblings, and now, her, and maybe, even a child. Why do we live? I floated in front of him and saw the sorrow in his eyes. Zhou Fang quickly disagreed. No, no, my lord, don't think that way. The lady is still the lady, and didn't the physician say you'd have news of a child this year? Peiji didn't respond in words, but then he thought aloud. Investigate, find out if Lord Song's wife had twins. If so, it explains everything. His calm mind quickly considered this possibility. However, only a few people knew my mother had twins. The sorcerer had long traveled far and wide. The nanny had passed away, leaving only my parents and Yer aware, and my parents had been prepared, ensuring no loose ends. Chapter 17. As expected, Zhou Fang found nothing. Over the years, the midwives and servants present during the birth had passed away one by one. Perhaps the nanny had been poisoned by them as well. She had always been in poor health and went back to her hometown to recuperate, only to die shortly after. I was so grief-stricken that I couldn't get out of bed, and Yer was then sent by my parents. Yer and the other maids were interrogated, but no clues were found. Ultimately, Yer claimed she couldn't withstand the torture and killed herself by impaling on a knife. Now, the only ones who knew the whole story were my parents and Song Ruchu. Song Ruchu, wearing my usual attire and hairstyle, came to see Peiji. She didn't cry or make a fuss and stood there quietly, resembling me the most at that moment. Even Peiji seemed a bit dazed. Song Ruchu served tea, recounting some intimate details that only Peiji and I knew. These incidents had occurred after Yer arrived, indicating that Yer had been quite adept at spying. Peiji listened quietly, then asked, "Since you remember so well, do you recall what I said to you on our wedding night?" Song Ruchu's eyes tightened. She had thought revealing those intimate details would convince Peiji, but hadn't expected the counter-question. "After all this time, I've forgotten," she said softly. "But I remember," he had said, "even if you are indeed pitiful, don't expect any pity from me." Peiji gave a cold laugh. "Forgotten? Then go and recall it, and tell me when you remember." Song Ruchu hurriedly left. I heard Zhou Fang and the others saying, "Our Lord's temperament has changed. He used to say it's better to kill wrongly than to let go. He's cautious because he cares." When did our Lord start caring for the lady? It wasn't obvious before. Sometimes love grows quietly. Maybe it started with a cup of tea or meal. Who can say? Chapter 18. My legs began to disappear, leaving only my long dress floating around. Based on my previous rate of fading, I estimated I only had a few more days before I completely vanished. Peiji's investigations shifted. He ordered the search for unidentified female bodies. Alive, he wanted to see me dead. He wanted my corpse. He believed that if he couldn't find my body, it would mean I was still alive. It felt like he genuinely wanted to find me, not just prove the Song family had deceived him. I kept trying to tell him I was buried under the pear tree, but he couldn't hear me. Sometimes, I thought he was rather dense. He dreamt of me under the pear tree but didn't think to dig there. A few days later, they found many unidentified bodies, including men and even infants. Peiji took Song Ruchu to identify them, but none were me. When passing the infants' bodies, he paused. Most of the infants were female. "My lord, what is it?" Zhou Fang asked. Peiji softly replied, "In my dream, the child was a lovely girl." I touched my stomach, feeling nothing. I never dreamed. I'd never see the face of that lovely girl. She came to me unknowingly and died with me without my knowledge. My 20 years seemed to have left nothing behind. Chapter 19. As we prepared to leave, dark clouds gathered, signaling an impending storm. I was becoming more transparent. I felt I would soon vanish. It saddened me that my killer still roamed free and my body remained buried in darkness. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't become a vengeful ghost like in the stories. I had no powers, not even the ability to float far. I didn't want to hide in Paige's shadow anymore. I floated higher, wanting one last look at the Cheyenne city I had never truly seen. The last time I was with Paige, he was in a good mood. While tying his hair, I asked if I could go out on my birthday. He said no. Later, he said we'd discuss it when he returned. I was hopeful, but it was in vain. Today, I'll pretend it's my birthday. Song Ali, 20 years old, a ghost of starvation, but she has seen the wonders of the world. As I looked at Paige's Cheyenne city, a commotion broke out below. I saw a disabled beggar clinging to Song Ruchu, shouting angrily. She frantically ordered his removal, but Paige was intrigued and intervened. It quickly became clear. The beggar was the scholar Song Ruchu had married. Unable to forget Paige, she had tried to kill Lunian but failed. He crawled to Cheyenne city, searching for her, finally finding her today. Thus, the truth was revealed. Chapter 20. The rain poured down as Song Ruchu knelt in the downpour, pleading with Paige. I swear, it was truly I who was meant to marry you. I haven't lied. Song Ali was a jinx. She didn't deserve to marry you. Now everything is just returning to its rightful place. I look exactly like her, and I can serve you better. You will surely like me. Paige stood under the umbrella, murmuring, so her name was Song Ali. Then he crouched down, looking at Song Ruchu with a cold smile. If you were willing to serve me, why didn't you marry me back then? Why now? Because, Song Ruchu stammered, unable to speak. Paige continued, because you were afraid of dying. Because what you couldn't have seen better, right? Song Ruchu whimpered, it was always mine. It was mine. My parents also pleaded for her, saying all the blame lay with them. Paige asked, you could have hidden Song Ali somewhere I couldn't find her. Why did you have to kill her? My father said, she was a jinx, she deserved to die. My mother added, if you found her, Ruchu would have been sent back. Hearing this, I wasn't even that sad. My father had many children and didn't he care about my life or death. My mother had raised Song Ruchu herself, and everyone said Song Ruchu was a blessing, so she favored her more and more. Paige finally asked, where is her body? None of them would say. They thought that since I was dead, Paige might not kill them, but if Paige knew I had died carrying his child, he wouldn't spare them. Paige suddenly realized something and looked towards the Song residence, then rode there. He went straight to the pear tree where I was buried. This year, the tree bore no fruit, not a single one. Paige threw away his umbrella and began digging with his hands. Zhou Fang and the others quickly joined in. Soon, I saw my body. I hadn't turned to bones yet, still looking somewhat like I was asleep. Perhaps because I died from poisoning, my body hadn't decayed much. I saw my stomach had been cut open, a horrifying sight. People turned away, some even vomiting. But Paige wasn't afraid. He took off his coat and covered my body, then lifted me up. In the pouring rain, it seemed like he was crying, but maybe it was just the rain. My lord, what should we do with them? Zhou Fang asked, pointing at my parents and Song Ruchu. Paige walked to Song Ruchu and slowly crushed her neck. She struggled desperately, but eventually, her head slumped to the side, lifeless. The jinx has dealt with them, he told my parents. Then he instructed Zhou Fang, as long as they don't die, do as you wish. Zhou Fang nodded, and my parents panicked, begging Paige to kill them outright. I had seen Zhou Fang handle assassins, subjecting them to 72 tortures, leaving them barely alive, living worse than pigs and dogs, more painful than death. Chapter 21. The rain stopped, and the sun spread over Cheyenne City. I whispered in Paige's ear, thanking him and asking him to cremate me instead of burying me in the ground. Though he couldn't hear me, I watched as he carried me further away, and I finally shouted, Paige, if you ever fall in love again, don't scare her, and tell her earlier. A breeze blew by, and the copper bell on the eaves chimed sweetly. I saw Paige suddenly turn around, looking at me, but he didn't see me. I floated back to the pear tree and saw it was in full bloom. A lovely little girl sat under the tree. I asked her who she was waiting for. In a sweet voice, she said, Mother, I've been waiting for you. I was stunned. She resembled both me and Paige. Maybe she was her child, or perhaps she was me, the small me who sat under the pear tree every day, longing for my mother to come. I smiled and took her hand. I'm here, let's go. She immediately clung to my hand. Mother, where are we going? I said, the world is vast, anywhere is fine. Chapter 22. The pear blossoms bloomed in large clusters. Holding hands with a little girl, I saw a beautiful river. Many people lined up along the riverbank, moving forward. Ahead of the queue was a place filled with warmth. As I approached the warmth, I heard Paige's voice, Song Ali. I turned to see him walking on the river. He wore his black long robe, the one I loved to see him in, his hair tied high, billowing in the wind. He came to stand before me and our child, saying, I called you before, but you didn't respond. Looks like I called you by the wrong name. Ali, glad I made it in time. I thought he was dreaming again, that his dream had crossed over, but behind him were countless soldiers crossing the river, bloodied and missing limbs. He had died in battle. He then naturally picked up the child and took my hand. Let's go. My parents are waiting for us. I looked ahead and saw many people waving to us. I saw Nanny too. She was angry. Ali, I prayed every day for you to live a long life. How could you come so early? Then I remembered at the moment of my death, I heard a voice, give her more time. Her nanny prayed for her every day. Let her see justice served. It wasn't Song Ruchu's doing that kept my soul intact. It was my sweet nanny who had prayed for me every day. Mother, I called her. She had raised me, named me, taught me, prayed for me, and now waited for me. She was my mother. Nanny cried and then smiled. The wind blew again, and pear blossoms danced in the breeze like snow. Green grass and flying orioles in all directions, moonlit nights, and pear blossoms. Ali, let's go.